Welcome to Westonka Memories. I'm Pam Myers and I volunteer with the Westonka Historical Society. Today I'm interviewing Becky Thorpe, a longtime resident in our area. Hi there, Becky. How are you doing today?
Hi, Pam. I'm fine. How are you?
Okay. Tell me about where you live. Tell me where you live and how long you've lived there.
Well, we moved to Mound in October of 1981. I grew up not far from Mound, between Delano and Lindale and Mound, kind of in the middle. Jim grew up in St. Cloud. My father's family and my mother's have been here a long time. But when Jim and I were first married, we moved to North Carolina. We were there for 3 years, came back to Mound. We lived in the Grandview apartments. We rented a house in Three Points. We lived in Shoreview apartments. We bought our first house on the island, another house near Grandview, and we ended up in this house in 1985. So we took a long route getting here. And we live on Halstead Lane, which I think was a fairly new development in the late 70s into the 80s. And so the houses are all about the same age. We've got great neighbors, great neighborhood. And Danny Welch, who I know you know well,
Indeed.
and another person who's in the construction business and is from Mound, Mark Willett, both told me about a dump being not far from this area on the other side of Saunders Lake.
Ah.
And one of their favorite pastimes as young boys, and I suppose junior high school, was going to the dump to scavenge and also shoot rats.
I see.
So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Indeed.
Yeah, but other than that, we're the second owners of this house. And I don't know much beyond that since it's a fairly new neighborhood.
Sure.
And I was just going to say, when we came to Mound in 1981, we saved some money. We felt very rich. We had a few $1,000s, but we had no jobs, no insurance, and I found out I was pregnant. So that was interesting timing, to say the least.
Indeed.
But Jim found a job and he was there for 35 years.
That's wonderful. And where did he work?
He worked at Film Tech in Edina, which was purchased by Dow Chemical, and he was a lab chemist.
It sounds like you've enjoyed living in the neighborhood where you are now. Tell me about one of your happiest memories.
In this neighborhood, or in general in this neighborhood? Well, I think when we probably having Aaron's, our younger son's wedding here 6 years ago. And when we were first looking at the house, you know how the real estate people always make it sound wonderful. But it was advertised as having a 3-story garage, you know, or a 3-story deck, I'm sorry. And yada, yada, yada. It wasn't as fancy as the brochure said, but we were laughing and saying, wow, that sounds like a party house. So it basically has been a party house throughout the years. We had Aaron's graduation party here, and like I said, his wedding, and we've had so many family reunion type things here, but his wedding was just amazing that it worked well.
Super. That sounds like fun. Sounds like it's been a fun house.
It has been.
Let's think back to before you were going to work, which is what I'm going to ask you about next. But before that, when you were younger, what did you think you wanted to be when you grew up?
You know, I was pondered that question last night, and I got to thinking that once when I was working at Shirley Hills, we got to go to a workshop where this woman was presenting kindergarten information. And she said, kindergartners often play their passion. And so I was thinking what I played as a kid was either with my dolls and house or school. So even though I didn't really have this burning desire to be this or that, I did live my passion of being a nurturer, a homemaker, a teacher.
Mhm.
And so I think that's what I really wanted to be when I grew up.
Super. Let's see, let's do a little family history. Tell me about your folks and where your folks came from. What was your mother's family background?
My mother's family background is, I couldn't get this picture out of the frame because it had become wet at one time and it's stuck in there. But my mother's the middle girl standing up.
Okay.
And my grandfather was Charles Johnson. His family came from Sweden, and I'm thinking he was about a third generation person here.
Mhm.
And my grandmother, Lily Zemer, came from the same area. They were both born near Delano, and her family was strictly German, and she was probably the second generation born here. And their farm was west of Delano. This is my mom standing in front of their farmhouse west of Delano during the war years. So that's where they were from. My father, we know much more about his history. This picture is Thomas Sturman, who was
Ooh,
born in Wales. Pardon?
A serious looking fella.
Yeah, well, he had a whole bunch of kids and he was a big time wanderer, I think, but he's got part of the family here. He came from Ireland, from Wales to Ireland to here. He came here as an indentured servant in, I believe I read 1742.
Wow.
So that's before the Revolutionary War even.
That's true.
So that's kind of fun. And he was he was like my father's great grandfather, I think. And we'll talk about Celia Sturman. I'm not sure where you want to put that, but she's a direct descendant of him.
Okay, why don't you comment about that now?
Okay, well, this is a detour from where my father's family's from.
Sure.
But I was fascinated to find that the first teacher on record in Mound was a person named Celia Sturman. I'm thinking, well, I know my dad's family, the Sturmans, have been here forever, so there has to be a connection. So I found her listed in this genealogy book. And she would be the granddaughter of this Thomas Sturman I just showed you. I'm not sure where she lived, but I do know that she worked in Mound she was in a house teaching. They didn't even have the log cabin school yet.
Right.
She was there for 1 month. And I'm not sure where I read this. I read it somewhere in one of these wonderful Mound histories where my question was answered, why only a month? And apparently she went to the school board and she asked for better conditions, more teaching materials for her students. I mean, it's an age-old problem, right, Pam?
Sure.
And they turned her down.
Oh my goodness.
She got riled up and she said, well, if that's all you can do for my students and me, then you can do without me. And so after that, Emma Carmen became the teacher. But I told my husband that story and his comment was, well, I don't think your family's changed a whole lot throughout the years.
And I was going to say strong genes, and they're just like your genes.
Oh, probably.
That's a good thing.
So I love that story. And that's kind of one of my passions or things I want to do is find out where she lived or whatever happened to Celia. Sure. There's got to be records somewhere. Yeah. But getting back to my father, so this is my father's grandfather, Riley Sturman. And he had a farm west of Delano on the river road. And he's got a great story too. He joined the cavalry during the Civil War.
Whoa,
And someone asked him, why the cavalry? His comment was, well, I figured if I was going to hell, I might as well go on horseback. So this was Grandpap Sturman, and this is their house that was on the river. I know it's kind of a bad copy. But his son, my grandfather, my father's father, was Clark Sturman, and I know it's a really bad copy of a copy, but this is a 4th of July float that he was taking into Delano to advertise his well digging business. And it says something about Sturman Well up here. So when Delano says it's got the oldest, longest going 4th of July parade, I don't think they're lying. This is kind of proof.
wow.
Unfortunately, he was killed on the family farm south of Delano on a 4th of July, 1920, in a dynamite accident.
Oh, goodness.
So that was kind of not good. So this is Riley, who was the first one here. Also, Riley helped cut down the trees to make the first street in Delano. That's kind of a claim to fame. This is his son, Clark, who is my dad's father. He was the one who was killed in the dynamite accident on July 4th, 1920. Apparently, July 4th was important to him because I'm not sure what year this was. He was going into town to be in the 4th of July parade. Clark married Melissa Eckleberry, and she lived up near Montrose, but both she and the Sturman family had kind of come here via Pennsylvania, Illinois, Missouri, Virginia, West Virginia, and they got up here in the probably 1830s, somewhere in there. So one of their children was my father, Lyle Sturman, and this is my mom, Elma, and their wedding in 1947.
Oh, beautiful picture.
Isn't that fun?
Wonderful.
And I should have showed you this earlier. This is my mom's parents. I love that one, Charlie and Lily Johnson. But so mom and dad bought a house on Copeland Road, which is southeast of Delano. And that's where I grew up. My brother's still living there. And coming to Mound was always such a thrill when we were kids, Pam. I can't even tell you. I mean, Mound, it had the drugstore with the soda fountain.
Right.
It had a furniture store. It had a shoe store. It had a Ben Franklin store.
Yes.
These were all long praise. These were all wonderful stores. But the reason we got to come to Mound fairly often was my dad loved coming to the grocery store. I believe it was a Piggly Wiggly, kind of where the old Ben Franklin store was. When they would have hamburgers, 3 pounds for $1.
Wow.
Wow. So we saw that in the ad and we're going, yes, I bet we get to go to Mound this week. And if we were really lucky, we would get to go to the drugstore and get a Coke or something fun. So that's how my connection to Mound came about. I had various relatives, cousins who lived here, went to school at Shirley Hills. And so even though I didn't grow up in Mound per se, it's always been an important part of our life as a family.
Yes, that's terrific. So before we leave your family, before we leave mom and dad, I wonder if you had any family traditions that you continued in your own family.
Well, holidays, 4th of July, Christmas, birthdays, Easter, that's always important. But I got to thinking, Pam, that probably the tradition that I think my brothers and I have continued is the storytelling. My mom and dad were wonderful storytellers. That's why I know about my grandfather, great-grandfather going to hell on a horseback. And nobody could tell a story the way my dad's family could. I swear it was like being in a comedy club, listening to them. And there's stories that are just such common everyday things, but mom and dad both made the people that they knew back then come alive, and they're still alive in my mind, and I've tried to pass that on to our kids, and my nieces and nephew kind of have the same tradition that they grew up with.
Super. That's a great tradition. Living where you did in Mound probably had some influence on where you went to work. How did you happen to come to work in the school district?
I had always wanted to work in the school district because our two boys were going to school and it sounded like a great place. And previously, I had worked in a couple of libraries, the University of St. John's. I loved the school atmosphere, the learning, teaching, being with kids, people of a like mind. So I decided I would put in my application. And Pat Bird, who was director of the food services at that time, called and said that a friend of mine had said, yeah, she'd be a good person. So I started working in the cafeteria at Shirley Hills. And then life got even better, Pam, because the person who worked in the Xerox copy center was taking a 6-week vacation. And they needed a sub. And so I got a call from, I forget who it was even. I think it was you. And I had to come in, and like I told you the other day, I was scared. Dr. Pam, the superintendent, oh my word. Well, then you turned out, you turned out to be so wonderful and just fun to talk to. And you hired me for that 6-week position. And I fell in love with being there. I thought, oh my gosh, if I could be here, I would be in heaven. Well, luckily for me, this woman that I did the subbing for decided to go pursue some different interests. I got hired as a person in Xerox, and I just was floating on air. That was good enough and wonderful enough. But then, Pam, once again, you were my fairy godmother. You came and said, have you ever thought about working as a Title I person? And I thought, Title I? And I said to you, what's Title I? And you explained it to me. Oh, okay. So I filled out my application. I had my interview with Rich Nicoli, who was the principal at Shirley Hills. I remember telling him when I started working at the copy center, it just felt like coming home. And that's the way it was for the next 24 years. I felt like I was at home in my job. I loved every minute of it.
Well, we certainly loved having you there.
Well,
What did you like most about the job itself?
At Shirley Hills?
Title I job.
I think being with the kids and in this school atmosphere, and where you never knew what was going to happen from day to day. It wasn't a routine job where, you know, you're going to do this from 9 to 10 and blah, blah, blah. You learned, you were on your feet, being flexible, laughing. I mean, just rolling with the punches, or trying to make a kid behave or learn, or just laughing with the kid. Just the wonderful kids and the staff, and being part of the academic world, I think.
Super. So did you learn some things from your work life? Did you get some lessons learned from working?
I think I mentioned learning to be flexible. It's like, oh my gosh, you cannot be set in a rigid schedule or rigid mindset when you work in any type of school. And learning to laugh if something goes wrong. I mean, having a big fit over it doesn't help. Oh, well. So I think those are good life lessons I learned.
For sure. I wonder if you think about people that you met in the community, were there people who were influential for you or for your family?
In the community, yes. Well, once again, Rich Nicoli was principal for both of my kids. He was my first boss. People at Shirley Hills still say, oh my gosh, we love Rich. If only Rich were still here. Not to degrade the principals that have come since, but there was just something about him, his calmness, his goodness, his steadfastness. I think those were all very good things for both his students and his staff to emulate. I also have to say we go to church at the Methodist Church, and the first minister there, Reverend Brian Hacklander, he was the one who was there when the kids were young. He was amazing. So those are two people that really come to mind quickly.
Super. That's terrific. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
So my closing is, how would you like to be remembered if we were doing the next generation interview and your name came up?
I'm like my dad. I always have to tell you a story. When we lived in North Carolina, there was an ancient cemetery down the street that had these above ground tombstones and weeping trees that kind of hung down over. It was cool. I'd go sit in there. We lived in a non-air conditioned house. But there was this great big above ground tombstone, and lots and lots of information about this man from 17 whatever. And at the end it said he was somewhat useful in this life. And so I've often thought about that. I hope I can be at least that much, but more seriously, I'd like to be remembered as someone who made a difference in a positive way in the kids' lives that I've touched, maybe brought some happiness or comfort to people as I've talked to many people and listened to them tell me things, and maybe just bringing some happiness to the world, leaving it a little better than when I entered it.
Well, I certainly believe that to be true of you, Becky.
Well, thank you.
Well,
You too, Pam.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing some of your family history with us. We will archive it, and it will be available for future generations.
Well, how exciting. Thank you.